Okay. Hello, everybody. A very warm welcome to our learning session on community networks, bridging the digital divide and connecting the last mile connectivity. So we are very excited to be offering this learning session where hopefully we can all learn together about community networks. So this session is put together by the Technological Innovations for Sustainable Development platform. So this platform is co-convened by two organizations, the Association for Progressive Communications, or APC for short, and Institute for Social Entrepreneurship in Asia, or ISEA for short. I'm Albert Teo. I'm the moderator for today's learning session. I serve as a regional council member of ISEA. I also have a full-time job. I'm a professor and also the dean of the School of Management at Dong Hwa College in Hong Kong. Okay, so today we are very excited and very honored to have with us three panel speakers. So our panelists will be sharing with us later on different cases and stories of how community networks operate in different parts of the world. So community networks are basically community-based initiatives which provide internet connectivity to communities that are otherwise socially and digitally excluded. So hopefully at the end of today's session, all of us will be able to have a better understanding of different models and different approaches to managing community networks. We will also better understand how community networks provide holistic connectivity to marginalized and excluded communities. And also we will have a better understanding of how community networks provide that last mile connectivity, especially now amidst the COVID pandemic. Okay, but before we proceed further, let us now have a photo taking session. So can I invite all of us to turn on our cameras? Okay, so don't be shy. We can all turn on our cameras for the photo opportunity. And then after that, we will proceed with today's session.
Okay, taking the first photo. 3, 2, 1. One last. 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. I think you can turn off the cameras if you want to. Okay, so, but before I invite the three panelists to share with us, first, let me invite Lisa Dakanai, who is the founding president of ISEA, to deliver her welcome remarks. So as I've shared with a lot of people, Lisa is my guru. Back in 2006, she was the one who led me on to this exciting journey and discovery of social entrepreneurship. So Lisa, please.
Thank you, Dean Albert. We've gone a long way together.
Yes.
So I'd just like to welcome everyone in behalf of the Social and Community Enterprise constituency of the Asia Pacific Civil Society Engagement Mechanism. This is actually the civil society mechanism that engages the UN system on the Sustainable Development Goals. And also, of course, in behalf of ISEA and APC, who co-convene the Technological Innovations for Sustainable Development platform. Let me just give you a brief background of these learning sessions. In August, October 2021, ISEA and APC embarked on a learning journey to explore the relevance of social entrepreneurship in the ICT sector and among enablers and supporters of community networks and community-based connectivity initiatives. This resulted to a partnership with APC to co-convene the Technological Innovations for Sustainable Development platform, one of 5 platforms presented during the Social Enterprise Advocacy and Leveraging Conference that we co-convened with the UNSCAP in 2020 as a response to addressing the critical issues faced as we engage in efforts towards inclusive recovery, building back fairer, and accelerating the SDGs. We've actually also decided on the focus of the platform to develop and promote community networks and community-based connectivity initiatives in the Asia-Pacific region. And it's a pleasure to welcome you to this 3-part learning journey to better understand community networks and community-based connectivity initiatives as an important segment of social enterprises. Today, March 17, we are honored to have Gustav from Common Room, Sol of Senseleni, and Carla of Redes. I understand it's even midnight in Mexico where Carla's from, and she's joining us to actually talk to us about or share with us their experience about their social enterprise models. And then on March 24, we are wanting to discuss the challenges and issues faced by community networks and community-based connectivity initiatives. And on April 7, we will be discussing an enabling policy environment to assist the development and growth of community-based connectivity initiatives and community networks. At the end of these three sessions, we are hoping that a number of you will join our platform, Technological Innovations for Sustainable Development platform. And some of you will also work with us to start to set up new community networks and community-based connectivity initiatives in Asia Pacific in partnership with APC, and to work with us to engage governments to create an enabling environment for community networks and community-based connectivity initiatives to flourish in the region. So as Albert said, we are excited to start this learning session today, and we wish all of you a fruitful learning journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lisa, for your welcome remarks. Now it's my pleasure to introduce to you our first panel speaker. Our first speaker is Sol Luca Di Tiena. She is the acting CEO of the Zanzeleni Networks, which is a community network that operates in South Africa. So Sol brings with her many years of experience. So she has worked in and led various projects in telecommunications, in renewable energy, in education, and basically these projects aim to address socioeconomic and environmental challenges. Okay, so over to you, Sol.
Thank you very much, Professor Albert. I would like to share my screen. Please let me know if you can see it. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can see.
Yes.
So good morning, everyone, and just thank you to ISEA and APC for this opportunity. I want to take you briefly through just sharing with you what we do at Zanzeleni as an example of a community network. As Professor Albert mentioned, we are operating in South Africa, but I would also, at the end of the presentation, include just a couple of slides about other community networks in Africa that kind of illustrate perhaps, or the objective here is to illustrate what some of the similarities and the kind of models that we look at in this region. So very briefly here, I want to share, just a comparative of how we understand a normal telecommunications provider scenario versus what we understand as a community network scenario in our case. So in broad strokes, telco scenarios for many communities, and especially the ones that we operate in, are inaccessible. Two ways, for two reasons. One is either there's no service or just the costs are prohibitive. In South Africa has one of the highest telecommunications costs in the continent, and I believe quite high for the global standard. There are also technological challenges that seek to bridge the digital divide. So they are parachute type of interventions that are perhaps very well-meaning, but they arrive, set up something, leave, and 6 months later it doesn't work. Also, it's not just about connectivity. It's also about people's limited access to devices and the know-how or skill to utilize the internet or ICTs as to draw value for their lives. So, when connectivity is sorted, that is just not enough to bridge the digital divide. And then low internet relevance. So what we speak about here is really, in our case, and I'll show you where we operate, very few people speak English. It's remote rural areas. And a lot of what we find on the internet, or what is most easily accessible on the internet, is really created for primarily English speakers and in middle to high income earning and urban settings. So we really question, further to just bridging the digital divide from a kind of technological perspective, where is the value, where is the meaning of connectivity for underserviced communities? And so community networks really aim in different ways and to address affordability, quality connectivity, community design, so for and by the community, actively working on demystifying the technology or the internet, and this holistic approach to really answer the context. What is the context requiring for ICTs to have a meaningful contribution in these communities? So briefly, where we are situated, here's Africa with its amazing array of flags, and we are just in South Africa in the southeastern coast. So here, what I want to just show you is a little bit of a glimpse into our everyday. Yeah. So we are in a region that is predominantly occupied by the Amaxhosa community. There are two kind of organization or community organization bodies. There's the tribal organization and municipal government organization. It's a population of about 100,000 people. They own cattle and land, and as you can see, it's a beautiful landscape, but there is very little exploitation of this for food and commerce. These areas during the apartheid regime, political regime, were systemically underdeveloped. And we still see that now, 27 years after the fall of that regime, where that was the one road that you saw in the video. If you want to get to any of the other places, you have to walk. There's limited access to water, there's limited access to electricity, and very often the limited access is cut off. And every other primary service is difficult to access or serve the people. So where we came in is that we saw that people in this critical threshold of where they live were spending up to 25% of their income on telecommunications, which is unsustainable for any of us, right? So we created Zenzeleni, and Zenzeleni Community Networks has been created as a cooperative model where we have a cooperative in each of the communities. Each community is made up of several villages. In our case, we have one community made up of 12 villages, another community made up of 9 villages, and there's a cooperative that represents them and owns the network and operates it locally. And then there's a partnership with, here you can see the representatives of the two communities, and then where I sit here is the non-for-profit company that supports the cooperatives to bridge their reality to the telecommunications sector. So we provide anything from technical to business to legal to strategic input partnerships, etc. And yeah, we look at these 3 layers where the cooperatives on the ground can be described as the micro layer. the telecommunications sector can be described as the macro layer. So the NPC, the non-for-profit company of Zenzaleni, sits in the middle, harmonizing these very, very different realities. Very briefly here, just to show you our progression. So I'm not going to go into everything, but just to really highlight that we've gone from an academic action research project from the University of the Western Cape in South Africa and the partnership with the Mankosi community where we seeded. We then went through a phase of piloting different technology, different financial, social and legal solutions, or let me put it the other way. We looked at different challenges and they came up and tried to address them until we got to, in 2017, really the sense of, okay, we've got to build our own network all the way to where we can connect to fiber. We tried to collaborate with other telcos in the area, and that was just not feasible. And then from 2017 to date, we really have developed more and more the sense of what is this two-tiered model? How does affordable connectivity sustain itself? And that's where we've developed products. And then going beyond that, as I mentioned, connectivity is absolutely necessary, but not enough. Just to give you a brief show of, so this is one community, Mankosi. This is where the 12 villages are. This is another community, Zitulele. And we have a network that runs from the main city in Umtata, where we have a fiber connection, where we've created our own towers and then distribute speedy, high capacity, quality connectivity to these areas. This is just to show you that how we do this is through really workshops with people in the community, which assemble, configure, design the network from the layer that is absolutely essential. If this is filling a gap for communities which are already struggling within the norm of telecommunications, or where, some often public funded programs where they come and connect the school, say, and then it doesn't work. I mean, we connected a school that had 4 previous public connections and none of them worked. So the social element, the integrative element of people knowing how to work with this technology and taking ownership as how it needs to work for their community is an absolutely fundamental aspect of community networks. So to just illustrate what I showed you in the map earlier, this is one of our towers here on the right. These are high capacity antennas that can bring in wireless internet connection or broadband into the community over large distances. And then we bring them into, a smaller receiver, which then feeds a hotspot. I must say, I have to update this picture. We don't no longer use these antennas, but it serves the purpose to illustrate. So we will have a hotspot here, which will give connectivity to people, very much like a router in your home or office. And what we find, I mean, for us, it's essential to have solar and battery backup because there's no regular power. And so I want to just highlight how important power is to connectivity, and that in many of the underserviced communities where we are, we have to also manage other infrastructure issues. And through this system, we offer 2 main services for connectivity. One is prepaid vouchers. So you get a voucher with a number, you connect to Zenzaleni Networks, and you are asked to put a code in. And that serves, it's 32 days for 25 Rand, which is, I believe, just over a US dollar, for a month uncapped. And that really is to make sure that everybody has access. And then we subsidize that or cross-subsidize that with monthly dedicated contracts. So that will be to the local NGOs, local businesses, some homes that can afford an individual connection. and they sign a contract, and it's a monthly payment. We've also connected the district hospital. So again, these are areas where this is a district hospital. It's funded by public funds. They do have a connection, but only to the administrative office. So that limits their staff and patients being able to utilize ICTs to address healthcare needs, right? And briefly, just to give you a sense of how we've grown, so we grew from 12 hotspots in 2017. Hotspots meaning, a place where you can access, you can connect to Wi-Fi on your phone, computer, tablet, whatever, and get access to the internet, and to now being over 75 hotspots. Also, the anchor clients is what I mentioned as monthly contracts, also grown over time. Backhaul devices. The backhaul is what we call the long distance connection points, also grown in complexity. But perhaps where I want to just pause is really just on the data usage. So one of the things that we saw was, because of this issue of the digital divide, where those that have the skill to access the internet, the devices to access the internet, and the money to access the internet, obviously draw most value out of it. And that was always in these areas, because you need those three elements, that always sat, even when we took the network to these communities, it sat, the majority use, sorry, it's very early in the morning, so please bear with me. It sat with the anchor tenants. So we were, the network was being more used at the beginning by the more privileged users, because they had everything that was required. And what we saw is that over time, through these community interventions, and most importantly through COVID, where many people that live in the urban areas, to send money back to the rural areas, came back to the rural areas. They had devices, the knowledge, and suddenly the percentage or ratio grew immensely towards the community usage. And we jumped really from 6, 13 to 23 to 27 terabytes per month. I mean, that's a massive, massive use, and showed just how much during, especially in COVID, connectivity can bring value. Just carry on. This is just the analysis that you've just seen, but in terms of numbers. So really, even though, and I think maybe I can contextualize this slide, the normal narrative of why telecommunications companies cannot service sufficiently these areas that are marginalized or underserviced is because there's no business plan. There's no return on investment. And so this shows that, in fact, if you stick it out, it is sustainable. You actually can, it's not about making money, but it is possible to sustain the infrastructure in the business locally. And of course, the amount of money that was being spent, otherwise for a multinational or a centralized company is now being retained in the community. And that's a huge element, because in our cases, there is no other industry that is locally owned or that retains the income in the community, which obviously perpetuates this low economic cycle. So this is not only interesting from a point of view of telecommunications, but also from the point of view of local economic development. How much time do I have? I just want to check the time, if I can. While we do that, I'll just show, I've mentioned this. This is the two-tiered model of where we look at growing these cooperatives or locally operated telecommunications model, and then centralize this kind of bridging between the local realities, which I cannot stress enough how different they are to the sort of formalized urban sector realities, So that's the growth model, is that if we can centralize that, for example, legal expertise of how to navigate the regulatory framework, that's expensive and that's complex and very specialized. So if we can centralize that for different communities and share the costs of that, the same as buying bandwidth. If we buy bandwidth in bulk, which we do in Zenzaleni for the two communities, the unit price goes down. So there is where a critical element of the sustainability is about finding the right things to centralize or aggregate versus, letting each community really answer to their own needs, which they are experts at. And then briefly, just to mention, beyond connectivity, we have introduced this refurbished a container, which is a computer lab. This was in collaboration with Computer Aid International and APC. And really, this is the point that I was mentioning, is that we've seen, through COVID, a growth in use, but we still see that people have very limited access to devices. So often sharing, 5 people will share a single phone, or a phone is not enough to then, engage in work. So we've got this computer lab which offers access to devices and ICT training. And ICT training really focus on applied. So if the predominant activity is cattle herding or agriculture or tourism, we aim to use ICTs and look at that bridge so that there's a very clear support to the immediate environment through ICTs. That's just what it looks like inside. We've also trained a local teacher. This is just, as I mentioned, the district hospital, and maybe going back to that holistic intervention is that we see that just connectivity or just training or just a computer is not enough. Whereas here, for example, with the hospital, we partnered with the hospital, with the Internet Society. We partnered with UpToDate, which is a medical journal, and Vula Mobile, which is a referral app. And that together comprehensively has addressed some of the most urgent needs for patients and staff. And our connectivity, obviously. And then, very briefly to say, again, with COVID, what we saw is that we needed to create or make accessible information in a local language, which we did through a community platform. One of the things of having a community network is that as an operator, we were able to zero rate whatever content we wanted. So it didn't even require somebody to spend that dollar to access. And we provided all the education and health websites in South Africa for free, and also created this community notice board for people to be able to access information about Corona in their own language. And I'm going to just finish off saying, we've now, again, working with APC and the Internet Society, we've been supporting other communities in South Africa for several years to grow community networks. And the most recent project we have is this one where we have 7 micro organizations, and we have developed a national program for community networks to train people from their community, very much asking, or saying these are the tools, and supporting them to articulate what it is that they would need with connectivity and ICTs to bring value and meaningful connectivity and bridge the digital divide. I think that's enough. I mean, just to mention that in Bosco, in Uganda, there is Bosco. And just to say, very briefly, that they have Wi-Fi and solar services. So it's not just, I illustrated Zenzaleni's case. In DRC, there's Pamojanet, also really just very inspiring projects. They do Wi-Fi and GSM services. They're carrying one of their towers up to the hill, I believe. And then that there is also, I think in Bermogenet, developing apps. This is, each app that community networks have developed is very much responsive. I know that there's one for providing safety for women, others that provide a platform for local services. So really the amount of applications at different community networks depends on what the needs of the community are. And yeah, I hope that gives you a brief picture of what some of the community networks in our region do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saul. Very inspiring sharing. So my key takeaways from your sharing are first, when you have a cooperative model for the community networks, that is very important because you give the people, the community members, ownership. So they take charge, they have agency, and they feel empowered. Second takeaway for me is with a cooperative model, you actually allow the income and revenues generated to be retained within the community. And also you emphasize that each community would have its own specific needs. So for example, if you conduct ICT training, the ICT training should be very focused and should respond to the specific needs of the community. And I think you also raised the challenge that sometimes communities face poor infrastructure. So like unstable electric supply, which means you also have to make sure that the communities have backup like solar power and the use of batteries. Okay, so thank you very much, Saul. And now let me introduce to you, to all of us, our second speaker. So our second speaker is Gustav Iskandar. Gustav founded the Bandung Center for New Media Arts many years ago. And this center eventually evolved into a nonprofit organization called Common Room Networks Foundation, which is basically now an open platform for arts, for culture, for ICT, and for media. Okay, so let me now invite Gustav to share with us his experience with community networks in Indonesia. Gustav, please.
Thank you, Albert, and thank you for the time. This is probably my second time sharing the knowledge and experience together with ISEA and APC. I'm really grateful to have the time to discuss and exchange experiences so I can learn more on what we do and expand our activities. I would like to share a bit of a story, and then probably after that we can have a further discussions on this. As you probably noticed, in the past couple of years, starting from 2019, together with Common Room in APC, we are developing a community networks projects in Indonesia, in particular to the Kasepuan Ciptagelar Indigenous Community region in West Java. This is one of the first piloting project that we are trying to develop. As you probably understand that during the COVID-19 pandemic outbreak, I think everywhere in many parts of the world, internet connectivity is becoming a very important tool, not only to support the daily communications, but also in many areas it also supports public administrations, health service, COVID-19 pandemic response, and so on and so on. And well, in Indonesia, actually, there are already a significant growth of internet penetrations, but in the reality, the digital divide challenges are still exist in many places of Indonesia, in particular to rural areas and remote places. I think the situation is a bit the same with Africa or maybe Latin America. We have quite diverse geographical situations, from thick forests in the mountain, remote islands, coastal areas, and so on. And this also causing the absence of basic internet infrastructure, differences in bandwidth cost. There are quite a challenge to get an appropriate or affordable devices. Even electric sources also in many places are still a problem. And there are also some cases that internet is not too relevant for local community because there are not so much local content that are relevant for their life, for example. And this also include the lack of digital skills and gender gap, in which also being reported by many of our fellows. And actually the LockNet projects is part of strategy to support, develop and consolidate citizen initiative in providing a community-based internet infrastructure. As you know, this is also part of a digital access program in which are supported by FCDO together with APC. And this piloting is also being implemented together in many different countries. And I think in this particular context, why we see community-based internet infrastructure, apart from the rights to get the universal access and connectivity, there are some global challenges and complexities that are being experienced by many countries, including us in Indonesia. That we experience the human population is increasing of population growth in many places in Indonesia, the increasing gap of urban and rural development, increasing impact of climate change, and lastly but not least, the impact of COVID-19 pandemic, in which we also learned that probably in the future there will be some other kind of pandemics that are going to be experienced by us, and we see that internet is one of the most important tools to overcome some of these challenges. In Indonesia, particularly to West Java, for example, based on the projections reported by our governments in 2045, there will be up to 100 million people who live only in West Java. Some people see this as a demographic bonus, but some see this will be a demographic a burden or even a disaster. And in terms of digital divide, we still, as I mentioned before, we still experience many challenges. Like, for example, based on a report come from our government that more than 12,000 villages still have no internet access. In West Java alone, during the COVID-19 pandemic situations, we have around 42,000 students who cannot taking part in remote education activities because there are no internet service in their areas. And that is why when it comes to community network, we see that as an alternative solutions that, of course, in our understanding, the community networks is internet infrastructure and services that are provided by the community, developed and maintained by community, and also utilized by local community, in which in our country we see that it's supposed to be legal, comply with existing policy and regulations. It also should be safe for the user, and in terms of it should be affordable for the people and have a meaningful and direct impact in order to increase their quality of life. And we have 5L principles to approach these challenges. We feel that in terms of technology, it should be low-tech or accessible, at least in local context. And because we have a lot of issues and energy supply, it should be low energy, and it should be easy to maintenance for the maintenance and easy to learn by people in many different parts of the country. And we also need local support. That is why we tend to work with local administrations, local municipalities, to collaborate directly with local communities and so on, so we can develop this as a shared agenda, especially for people in rural areas and remote places. And we see there are core components that are important to be recognized on this effort. Mainly, one of the most important is the brainware. That is why for the local community networks project in Indonesia, we tend to start with trainings, workshops, community empowerments, knowledge transfer, to increase the skills, to increase the knowledge, so they are able to operate software or even to develop hardware or physical infrastructure. And by talking about meaningful communication practice, what we mean is that we are expecting that the development of community networks infrastructure can be improving the quality of public services, for example, also facilitating remote educations, to improve health services and handling of COVID-19 pandemic, and so on, including the economic recovery, production and distribution of local knowledge, as well as to utilize certain technology to address challenges and daily needs. And this is the two locations that we are working in the past couple of years. The first picture is the locations of Kasepuhan Ciptagelar indigenous community, like in the deep forest of Halimun Mountain. And the second prototype is in the southern coastal areas in West Java. Each area has its own geographical challenges and difficulties, and we learn a lot. That the first component that are can strongly impact the success of this effort is the leadership. We need local leadership and local engagements, and from there, all of some other challenge can be managed step by step. And this is some of the activities that we are doing. We do direct on-site workshop. We consultate directly with the local chief leader. We organize offline and online workshop. We even now in Ciptagelar, we are already developed a training center and media lab, so we can have more regular trainings and workshops activities in which to have more skillful technicians and operator in order to make sure that the local community networks is work properly and can expand the outreach to other village as well. We start with one village and expand to 5 municipalities, and to expand to 5 hamlets. And currently, the local community-based internet infrastructure in Ciptagelar has already reached at least around 30 hamlets with daily users around 900 to 1,000. It depends on the weather. If there are some arts and cultural events or even cultural rituals, there are more users and so on. So we understand that in order to sustain the local internet infrastructure, we also need to develop a certain business model with specific business process. So there are some incentive can be supported the local technicians, the local internet voucher agents or operators, so it can create jobs and creates additional income for the local community. So this is how we manage income from the sale of internet voucher, for example. 35% is for operationals, 2.5% is for local technicians, and the other is for voucher agents and so on and so on. And we also do some reinvestment policy and savings in order to expand the outreach. And this is a local community-based network growth. Like in the past, in the last 4 months, for example, we have in average around 350 megabyte per second a day, and in the evening it will increase in average around 400 megabyte per second. And this is the gross income. If you see when the number went down, usually there is a problem with the infrastructure. Like for example, in October, the lightning strikes one of the backhaul, so the internet is off, and you can see from the number how many internet vouchers that are being collected and finance the local internet infrastructure. And this is how we manage the income allocations. The money goes to voucher agents, local technicians. We save the money, and some money also goes to Cipta Gelar Village, so they can support the mobilizations of local community in order to maintain the local infrastructure. Some money goes to Awinet, our partner local ISP, so we can purchase the bandwidth. We can ask them to conduct regular trainings and capacity building. Almost every month they come and organize training for new technicians, for example, or even to get a specific hardware or devices to increase the services and so on. And the reinvestment expenses up to now, we already allocate around $9,000 to expand the network outreach in the region, and we have the remaining saving around 25%, or around $3,250 just in case we need to do some replacement or get a new devices for to get a new connectivity in other village and so on. And from here we learn that apart from the community network infrastructure development, we also organize events like Rural ICT Camp. We conduct research on ICT policy and regulations. We involve in COVID-19 pandemic response. We do piloting into different areas, and from there, from the learning experience, during the evaluation meeting, we emphasize the importance of capacity building in individual and community level. That is why, starting from 2001, we decided to develop a School of Community Network program with training and workshops in many different areas, and the curriculum and training materials are collected from some of our experience, event, research, and so on. So the curriculum is mainly transferring knowledge in regards to rural ICT policy and regulations, how the know-how on community-based internet infrastructure developments. We also see human rights and gender equality is important principle, so we also add that as part of training materials, including the digital literacy for rural community, as well as various form of internet utilizations to improve the quality of public services for the COVID-19 pandemic response and so on, like educations, economic recovery, cultural advancements, as well as local knowledge productions and distributions. And this is our expanding program at the moment. We start with local initiative in West Java, in Cipta Gelar and in Cilacap. Currently, we are trying to develop the School of Community Network in Aceh, in West Kalimantan, in West Sulawesi, in Maluku, in Papua, and Mataredi, in North Lombok, in West Lombok, and yeah, that is some of the area that we are currently working at. And from here, we also expanding our learning process, because we see in terms of deploying the community-based internet infrastructure, one thing that is quite unique is that each area and places has its own challenges and situations. So it's not only about deploying the physical infrastructure, but you also have to learn about the local culture and situations in order to make sure that the community-based internet infrastructure can be utilized properly in local context. So I think in general, that is some of the experience that we have been learned so far. So maybe we can also discuss that further. Thank you, Albert.
Okay, thank you very much, Gustav, for your very interesting sharing on the Indonesian context. So I also had a few takeaways from your sharing. First, you reminded us that community networks should be legal, they should be safe, they should be affordable and meaningful. And then you shared with us the 5 L's of community networks: low tech, low energy, low maintenance, low learning curve, and strong local support. And then you emphasize the importance of developing brainware within the communities, so capacity building. And it's really inspiring that initially you talked about workshops, training centers, media labs, and now you even have a school of community networks. And then my final takeaway was your emphasis on having a good business model and having a good business process, because then you can create jobs and income for the local community members. So you mentioned the local technicians and also the voucher agents. So thank you very much once again for sharing. Good stuff. Okay, so now let me introduce our third speaker, who is Carla Velasco Ramos. She is the Latin America Regional Coordinator for the Connecting the Unconnected project of the Association for Progressive Communications. Carla is also the coordinator for the International Affairs area at Redes in Mexico. Okay, so let me now invite Carla to share with us the experience of community networks in Latin America. Carla, please.
Thank you very much, Albert. And I also want to thank APC and ISEA, how we pronounce it in Spanish, for the invitation to this conference. And apologies if my English is not the best. It's quite late here, and yes, it's been a long day, so now it's the end of the day, so perhaps my head is not working at its best. But anyway, I'm going to share my screen so you can take a look at my presentation, the one that I've prepared for you. And just let me know if you are able to see the presentation. Yes?
Yes, very good.
Thank you very much. Yes, so as you mentioned before, my colleagues before Gustav and Sol spoke specifically about the cases of community networks in South Africa and Indonesia. And I'm going to talk more broadly about the cases in Latin America. This is because, well, as my presentation said, I am the Latin America Regional Coordinator for the Local Access Network project, where Common Room and Senseleni are also part of. So in that sense, I'm going to give a more broad perspective of community networks in the region. I want to start with the definition of a community network, because in the different regions, we've seen that a community network might differ from region to region. So, for example, we got together in 2018 at the Community Networks Latin American Summit in Argentina, and we gathered together to discuss what a community network was for each one of us. We came together from different countries, from different organizations, and from different community networks. And one thing that we all agreed on was that community networks are owned and managed by the communities. In that sense, in the Latin America region, community networks tend to be non-profits and for community purposes. So I've heard in the cases of Asia Pacific and Africa, for example, that they normally operate as social enterprises. And in Latin America, it is a different case because most community networks are created by the communities themselves, and they tend to be more like NGOs or more like cooperatives, some of them. There are civil society organizations, and what we want as community networks is to exercise our right to communications under the principles of democratic participation of our members, equity, gender equality, diversity, and plurality. So behind all the idea of having community networks in the region, there's also a political theme behind the creation of community networks in some of the cases. And I will tell you more about it in the next slides. In the case of Latin America, we have different examples of community networks. In the cases that we presented before, most of them have do or are related with Wi-Fi or fiber. In Latin America, we have three different technologies. One is the mesh Wi-Fi, which is the first image that you can see in the screen. Wi-Fi operates in the 2.4 and the 5.8 gigahertz band. And it's the Wi-Fi that we normally know, the one that we're using right now, the one that I'm using now to speak to you. And many community networks are using this technology. And this is because the license or the access to license for this technology, well, there's no license, it's license free. Right, so some of the community networks that use this type of technology use it because it is easier to have this type of technology where you don't have to access or to request a license or even pay for the spectrum to use this technology. Secondly, we have the Gsm Networks, which is the 2.5 Gsm network, which uses the 900 megahertz band. And this is specifically for the use of cellular mobile telephony technology. And I'm going to talk more about this case in the next slides, but this is another type of community network that exists in the region. And finally, the third technology is high frequency radio, which is another type of technology for community networks. And it has proven to be a very successful technology for regions that are very distant from one another. And that, for example, in case you want to use Wi-Fi, sometimes the distance is so long. Sorry, my dog is scratching himself behind me. Sorry. Sometimes when you try to install a network and you are using Wi-Fi, distances are so long that it's impossible to install them, or even to use fiber, right? Or satellite connections. So HF radio has proven to be very useful for many communities that are very, very far from each other. And I'm going to mention this technology as well. In the case of mesh Wi-Fi, I wanted to share a bit about the case of Argentina, because as the LockNet project, we've been collaborating with an organization called Altermundi, which is located in Argentina, in the province of Córdoba. And this is a non-profit community network. This means that it is based, or it was created by the interest of the people, but it does not get any profit of any kind. What they did is that they have an agreement with a local university, which is not very far away from the town. And what they do is that they share the connection from the university with the town, and therefore with the people that live in the town. The members of the community decide how the internet is being used and how to become a user. And normally they get some, I forgot the name, but they get some, oh my God, my English tonight is not working very well. But they get some money from the community, and it's mostly money given to create the network, but not in a profitable way. So this is one of the cases that is happening right now in Latin America. And just to share with you that many of the members involved in Altermundi have created this open source hardware and software called LibreRouter. So as I mentioned before, behind community networks in the Latin America region, which is different to the other regions, there might be sometimes political statement. So one of the things about community networks in Latin America is that they try to be as autonomous as possible. And that includes the software and the hardware. This means that developers and technicians in Latin America have created this open source hardware, this open source router, which can be manufactured in any country. You can get the instructions to do it yourselves. And even in India, they are creating their own Libre routers at the moment, so that you can create this open source technology and you can create your own community network wherever you are. So this is sort of an alternative to private companies that sell their hardware or their routers to create these community networks. So this is another project, which is a very big project in Latin America, and that is supported by the different community networks, especially by Altermundi, who is leading the process of this initiative. The second community network or example that I wanted to share with you is the one of the Gsm Network, which is the cellular mobile telephony. And this community network is based in Mexico, where I am right now. And it's a sister organization of ours. I work at Redes, and Telecomunicaciones Indígenas Comunitarias is a sister organization of us. So for this community network, it was the first of its kind worldwide, because in order to have or create this cellular mobile telephony, we needed access to a frequency that was granted only for companies. So there was a change in the law in 2014, and thanks to that change or to that modification in the law, social operators and community and indigenous operators were recognized in the country. And thanks to that, we were able to access for a frequency in order to create this cellular mobile telephony. This is a picture of one of the antennas being installed. And it's, as I mentioned before, it's a Mexican community cell phone operator in unattended areas where commercial operators have been unable to reach. And right now it reaches 60 communities and it has 4,400 users. This is a very interesting case because it's one of its kind. It has been replicated in some other countries now, for example, in Colombia, and in some US states, I think in Hawaii as well. And the important part of this community network as well is that all the technology is also open source. So if you want to replicate this model in other countries, you can do so, but you have to be aware that in order to operate this type of community network, you need access to frequency. So you would need to speak or to reach out to your regulators in order to see how can this be possible, right? But it has proven to be a very good alternative, and I will talk about it later, mostly at the end of the presentation. I'm going to share a bit about their business model, but it has been proven that it is an alternative that works for rural and remote areas that are unconnected. So I'm gonna go to the next example, and this one is the HF radio, which is taking place right now in Brazil and Ecuador. And it's part of a project called Hermes. So when talking about this example, I'm mentioning this example because, and I'm sharing the countries as well, because I don't know if you are aware of the geography or the topography in the Amazon region, but the Amazon region is a very complex region in terms of connectivity and in terms of communities. There are very distant communities that are very hard to reach, and you even have to take many days to travel or to get there, or even to get there by boat. So many of these communities were unconnected for a very long time. And thanks to this technology, what they have done is that they have created new community networks using this high frequency radio technology. This type of technology was already used before by governments or even military forces in some of the countries. And we've also gotten access to the frequencies in order to use this type of technology. The benefit of this technology is that you can reach very, very long distances. I'm not sure about how long, because I don't remember right now, but it's very, very long. And you can send texts or even photos from one place to the other. So this is another example of the types of technologies that are being used for community networks in Latin America. And I think that one of my favorite parts about when talking about community networks is the part of local content and community intranets. So as I mentioned before, in many of the community networks that have been created in Latin America, not only have they been created because there's no connectivity or there's no access to telecommunication services, but also because there is a strong need for communities to make themselves autonomous and also to preserve their culture and traditions. Because, for example, in Mexico, we have, or there are many indigenous groups in the country, and many of them are losing their languages and their cultures and traditions because of the massive media that we receive every day. So one way of defending their ways of their ways of living is through the creation of community networks and the dissemination of local content and the creation of local content and the installation of intranets. So this is a very nice example of a community which is in Chiapas in the south of Mexico. And this is a bank of educational and relevant digital content for the community. So the community has created this intranet, which is only located inside the community. It is inside the territory. And if you access this intranet, then you can find local content in their own languages. And they've also created some videos and some photos that are inside the intranet. So these projects became even more relevant when the pandemic started, because as you can see, many of the communities are unconnected and the use of bandwidth can be very limited for many of the communities. So this is a way of having the content inside the community and not having the need to access the internet. It's an intranet, so the content is there. Another important fact in the Latin America region has been the participation of women, because many of the initiatives of community networks in the Latin America region has been led by women. For example, in the two pictures that are in the, well, all the pictures, but the ones that are on top, the two that are on top, those are initiatives from women in Mexico, and the ones that are in the bottom, the one to the left is from an initiative in Brazil, and the one to the right is from an initiative in Costa Rica. And these are community networks that are being created and that are being led by women. These 4 community networks that are being created have been also supported by the LockNet project, and they are concentrating their efforts on having intranets and having the local content. So as you can see, the intranets have become a very important alternative for the communities in the Latin America region. Moreover, there are strong bonds with community radios. So as I mentioned before, in many of the community networks in Latin America, there's a political statement behind. So these communities try to be autonomous and try to promote the things that are going on inside their communities. And this is one way of resistance, and it's through community networks. Of course, this is only the example of one region. I'm talking about the Latin America region because it was funny when I was speaking to a colleague from Kenya. She told me that in a community network that is deployed in Kenya, when you mention that something is free, is something that you would not trust, right? And in the Latin America region is something different. If it's free, then it's for the people. So there are many big differences in these types of community networks, right? I'm gonna go a bit faster because I'm running out of time. But well, just to mention some of the successes and challenges, the successes are that there are active members inside the communities. We have women, we have elder people, we have younger people, students, and many people that are involved in the process. We've also had the support from regulators and ministries, and you've seen this because we have different technologies, and this is thanks to the support of regulators. And we have also access to knowledge and technical skills. Capacity building has become very important for these projects, and we try to support this type of capacity building processes. So there's, for example, another school of community networks in Brazil, which is being deployed, and we would love to talk about it more, but we don't have the time now. But as well, the challenges. We have challenges on policy and regulation and also in sustainability. And the ones in policy and regulation are insufficient access to spectrum, backbone access and fiber access. It's also insufficient. And the taxes part. We had a very difficult battle with the Mexican government because they wanted us to pay taxes when we were a non-profit community network. So that was a battle that at the end we won, but it's not the same for everyone, right? And in the terms of sustainability, there are low technical and administrative skills, And there's also low investment. So we need more, we're trying to get more investment or get more money for many community networks to start in the region. And I can share this screen with you, but in the Latin America region, we have seen that community networks are based upon 4 essential elements, which is the organizational base, which is the social support of the community, the infrastructural base, which is the material and human resources infrastructure, the economic base, which is based on a business plan, and the legal base. So these 4 bases have become crucial for the sustainability of community networks, and they are very important. They have become very important for the cases that I've mentioned before. And just to finish, I want to share with you very, very quickly, because I know that we were supposed to share about business models. So I can send you a link I can send you a link from a paper that we wrote, which is which is in a book that was published 4 years ago. And the paper is called The Success of Community Mobile Telephony in Mexico and its Plausibility as an Alternative to Connect the Next Billion. And here in the business model, we talk about the key partners, the key activities and resources, and some of the expenses, the initial investments, which shows some numbers, approximate numbers, and also the CapEx and the OpEx of the communities that are operating. So I think I'm going to stop here because I know I've spoken more than I should have, but thank you very much, and the mic is yours, Albert.
Okay, thank you very much, Carla, for sharing with us so many interesting stories from different countries in Latin America. So my key takeaways from your sharing are, first, in Latin America, you mentioned that there are 3 possible technologies for community networks. One is mesh Wi-Fi. The second type of technology is GSM network. And the third is high frequency radio. And then you highlighted to us the importance of autonomy for a lot of communities, which means that in Latin America, people are used to producing open source hardware and software, which also means that with this sort of open source technologies available, anybody can actually set up a community network for his or her own community. And you also shared a very interesting example in Mexico of a community cell phone operator in certain areas which are very remote and they are not served by commercial operators. And then you talked about the importance of allowing communities the opportunity to curate local content and to set up a local community intranet. And then you shared some very interesting examples of initiatives that were led by women in these communities. And then you talked about challenges in the areas of policy, regulation, sustainability. And then you mentioned that to operate a community network, you need to have an organizational base, an infrastructure base, an economic base, and a legal base. So thank you very much, Carla, for your insights. Okay, now we have reached the Q&A section of our session today. I saw some questions posted on the chat box earlier. So there's one question from Anto of Bina Swadaya. How do you manage the community so that the community network is used for productive activities and not for watching streamed videos? Okay, so that's the first question. I know, Saul, you have given quite a nice answer to the question in the chat box, but I'm wondering whether you could also verbally share your answer with the rest of us who might not have seen your chat box answer.
Yeah, sure, I can
Okay.
answer. So
thank you.
Yeah. Sure, and I think it's a very key question that keeps coming up for different communities. So yeah, just briefly to mention what I shared in the chat. You know, I don't think that there is a single answer of how to make sure that people use the internet well. And I would say that it's not just maybe in productive sense, but also in a safe way or for the most benefit. I mean, I think that's a whole story on its own. But in terms of this community networks, what I have seen some strategies are, you know, really engaging in a dialogue with the community around, okay, what do we want this connectivity for? Like Carla mentioned, there are intranets as well, where you can determine exactly the kind of content that you have. But, you know, you still will have people accessing the internet, and you still want to understand what your objectives are as an organization. What kind of space you want to create, and I think that dialogue is essential. The other one is defining spaces. So for us, you know, we don't want to censor how people use the internet in Zenzaleni, and that, you know, you can censor in a positive way or try to be in a positive way, but at the end of the day, you're leaving someone out, right? And connecting the unconnected questions this of who has the right to determine what is useful content.
Yes.
What you can do, however, is determine a space. So for us, in the learning lab that we have specific policies around what people can do or not. For example, you know, there's no violent gaming. There's no nothing that would have hate speech. There's no, and for that we feel quite comfortable that in the spaces that we're creating, we can determine that. And also, I guess, working around timing. I know that Pamojanet and DRC has a very interesting model where they have, you know, paid internet from 9 till 5, and then after hours it's free. Now, I know that doesn't answer necessarily your question, but it is an interesting thing to think about how different timings or spaces can enable or discourage certain use of the internet. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much, Saul. Then the second question that I saw in the chat box is from my guru, Lisa Dakanai. Okay, so Lisa, your question is, can you give us an idea about the level of initial financial investment for setting up a community network and the sources of such investment? So maybe I could invite Gustav, Carla, as well as Saul to share with us your answers to Lisa's question. So basically, financial investment and the source of such financial investment.
So I will try to share you a bit of our perspective on the initial investment. I think similar to what is already mentioned by Saul, it can be very different from one place to another. Like for example, in Ciptagelar village, we start with the funding support from APC, in which around, if I'm not mistaken, is at that time is around 250 million rupiah. But again, it can be totally different. Like for example, in Ciptagelar, 100% of local infrastructure was supported by APC through the connecting the unconnected project. But you know, other village where we started to working this year, because in our country, our government starting from 2 years ago started to released this affirmative policy, in particular from the Ministry of Villages. They release a new regulations that prioritize the village fund. So in our country, based on the current law, our government have an obligations to allocate certain money to develop and support the village administrations. So they have their own authority to allocate funds, government funds from central government. So they allocate money to invest on local internet infrastructure with the use of government money. And the amount is also a bit different. You can start with very small investment, like 50 to 100 million rupiah, so maybe like 200 or $300 just to have the internet access, but then it's also depend not only in geographical context and how large is the outreach or network coverage. But again, in our context, we always try to start with affordable amounts of money, because we realize that the startup capital or the investment can somehow come from various different sources. It can you can work with international funding agencies, for example. There is a model that we are trying to work with the local private sector through the corporate social responsibility program. And apart from that, there is also in our context a model that we can work with local village government using available source of village funding, funding support. But again, if you ask how much, it can be different from one place to another. It depends on what kind of device you use, how wide is the coverage of connectivity that you want to reach, and what kind of what types of technology. Like in Papua is totally different scenario, because there in Papua the preferable option is to use the satellite through VSAT technology, because the area is not really easy to reach by the wireless technology, even or the fiber optics cables. But in other areas, it can be more affordable because the landscape is more friendly, so to say. Yeah.
Thank you, Gustav. And what about Carla? Could you share with us the situation in Latin America in terms of the level of investment and the sources of investment?
Yes, of course. Well, as Gustav mentions, it really depends. I think that the first step you need to do is ask yourself, what do you need the network for? If you're going to connect, or how many people are you going to connect, or are you just trying to make a pilot, or to get to know the needs of the people that you are working with, and from that you can even decide the type of technology. I mean, in that sense, it can be a Wi-Fi mesh network, or it can be an intranet. For example, in some of the cases, some communities realized that they didn't even need access to internet. They just needed a local network that had local content. So for that, you can get a server and just one access point, or even with a Raspberry Pi, right? So it really depends on the needs of the communities and the questions that you ask to yourself. And we have a methodology for that we have created. And I can also share that link with you. This guide is in English, and you can perhaps take a look at it, because sometimes it goes beyond technology. Because if you really want the network to be sustainable, and you most likely need the participation of the community, and you have to get the community involved. in order to sustain the network. So that has been one of the biggest challenges in the Latin America region. And because of that, for example, in the case of Argentina, they have created this agreement with their government where community networks now have access to the Universal Service Fund. So they can request access to the fund, and from there get some initial capital or like some financing from them in order to create community networks. In the case of Mexico, for example, in the case of the cellular mobile telephony, the initial investment is of $10,000. And sometimes the community gets together and they throw a big party and they make a raffle and they get the money and they get the initial investment. And that also is very valuable because then they are aware of the efforts that it takes to get the money, right? But it's not such a big investment in that sense. Maybe for some communities it is, maybe for some it's not, but I mean it really depends on the type of network that they want to build and who are going to be the users and everything. So I think that would be my answer. As part of the LockNet project, we try to open calls and we try to share in our newsletter. We have a newsletter and you can subscribe there. We give some information about different organizations that are giving financing. For example, ISOC sometimes gives financing through their chapters, or some of the development agencies from some of the countries. So it really depends, but I think there are many resources that you can use, and we are always here to answer the questions that you have. So if you feel that your situation relates to some of the examples that I've mentioned, or some of the examples that Gustav mentioned, or even Sol, I think you can reach out to us and we can give further assistance or mentorship on the case.
Okay. Thank you, Carla. And Sol, I know you have given a comprehensive answer to Lisa's question in the chat box, but maybe could you help us summarize the key points of your answer to Lisa?
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, absolutely agree with what Gustav and Carla have said. And really, it's just that each community has such a different requirements and assets in the way of, I mean, if no one has any skills, you're going to have to invest on developing those skills. If the accessing the broadband can be one hop, and the equipment itself is not very expensive. So I think, Gustav mentioned some detailed sort of costs, but network equipment is becoming more, especially Wi-Fi network equipment, is becoming more and more affordable, and the platforms are often free to monitor them. But if you have to go 80 kilometers or 60 kilometers to get to the broadband, that's going to be a significant cost. Not only for the initial cost to put up the towers or whatever to transmit through that distance, but also the maintenance to travel that far to have to operate that. Again, if you're going to connect a school, it's very different from connecting a whole community. If the community is very densely populated, maybe like 3 hotspots will be sufficient. But if they are very sparsely populated, like it's the case in South Africa, or I think in the Amazon, that becomes much more complex, where, the kind of distances that you're covering make everything, you have to duplicate that infrastructure. So, those are the critical points, is that you need to know how much do you have to invest on infrastructure and people. And then in terms of where you can get the investment, I think Carla has covered that really well.
Yes.
That's all I've got to add. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sol. I see a third question in the chat box. It's actually from Huang Hun, my friend and former colleague at National University of Singapore. So Huang Hun is asking, it feels like there will be border issues, border challenges when we try to reach beyond our own location, town, or city. And then Sabani Beller from APC. Sabani, you have already given quite a nice answer to Huang Hun. So maybe can I invite you to share with us your response to Huang Hun's question?
Thank you, Albert.
Welcome.
Hello. So when we see community networks grow, we usually cater to the needs of the local community. So it is often it's often in a very fixed radius of so it's like 5 kilometers radius, not more than that. I agree that there can be border issues or challenges, but that can happen only when we take connectivity from one location to the other. So we are not, that's when it becomes, we are not allowed to do that. And actually it is not so done as well. So only local communities, local intranet infrastructure, as mentioned by Carla, is also something that can happen only within the community, and you don't need to take it.
Okay, thank you very much, Sabani. Are there any more questions for our panelists and also for Sabani?
Maybe I can add
good stuff.
Questions on border challenges. In our country, in terms of regulations and licenses, actually the one who can provide internet services in regards to our policy and regulations is it can be either telco operators or internet service provider that are officially registered in our legal system. So of course, in the future, we would like to see that community networks can also be recognized as a legal entity that can provide service in internet connectivity. But for now, no own. We tend to choose working with either ISP or telco operators. Of course, based on our policy and regulations, we need to have an official cooperations with them in order to provide services. And in terms of different borders and different areas in our licensing system, once the ISP or telco operators can get licenses, they can operate in national level. So when we work with certain ISPs or telco operators, we can also operate in different areas and different regions. But from our experience, for us, it is best to work with certain ISPs or telco company that are operate in local level in order to make sure not only service but also the maintenance and resources can be allocated if there are some problems with the local connections or something like that. So we tend to rely on local resources and local company that are operates in local level. And to add Marilisa questions on organizational and partnership models, one of the strongest factors that are affecting a lot of effort in deploying the local community network is the leadership factors. So that is why the local support is pretty much important, and local leadership is one of the important components, because I think that is one of the most expensive investment. It's not really easy to get local support or local resources that are willing to learn and to adapt a new technical knowledge and learn how to build this together, because in some part of areas learning processes can be very challenging and can be very expensive. But I think the initial investment in our context is always goes to the brainware, always goes to the human, because from there you can somehow make sure that the whole development process can running. So that is why our approach is always comes to the human-centered approach rather than technological approach. Yeah.
Thank you, Gustav. I see another question from Lisa Dakanai. Lisa, you would like our speakers to share more about their respective organizational and partnership models. So maybe Saul, Gustav, Carla, could you briefly share with us your organizational and partnership models for community networks and the factors that affect the models?
Yes, I'm going first since you called my name out first.
Okay, thank you.
I'm very happy to go. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, because we, in reflecting how community networks are best set up, and now we're doing the National School for Community Networks. We're supporting another community to we're supporting these 7 communities to think through what would be the most successful way to start. And what I want to mention is many community networks, including ourselves, have started as a bit of a patchwork. We start where we can and then we build on it. So I think it's just important to bear in mind that there is those 2 differences. There's what you can do and what you end up building, versus if you were to know everything from the get-go, how you would build it. So we've partnered with a university. I mean, let me start from the perspective that the first is that we've partnered with a community. That's our first and core partner. With that, we've partnered with a university, and I think it builds both evidence and it builds, I think it has helped us a lot through the academic work to build respect for the initiative. And that's made us able to, approach then government and other organizations, which would otherwise might be a little bit reticent to partner with the community. So I think that's an interesting one. And then, I mean, essential partnerships have been with APC. They just have a lot of work in community networks and building peer relationships between community networks. Because there isn't a one-size-fits-all. So that dialogue of how do I approach it, how do you approach it, how can we build from each other's knowledge has been really important. And then through the Internet Society as well, they have a very, Carla also mentioned it, they have chapters in different countries, but they also have a very strong push for community networks. And I would say that just as a closing, international aid agencies, especially those that have been, I want to say not primed, but where APC and the Internet Society have really created a lot of awareness building and education around the digital divide and how community networks can answer it. They've been very receptive, whereas national funders have been a lot harder to engage with. So that's a kind of the picture I would like to leave you with. Thanks.
Thank you, Saul. And then Gustav, and then Carla.
In our approach, we tend to use a total football approach, which means the partnership and cooperation models that are working very well in our situation is this multi-stakeholder approach, that I think similar to what has been developed by Sol. We work directly with the local community, but to amplify the effort, we need to have other engagements with other institutions and agencies like the academic communities. Here in Indonesia, we work with University of Pajajaran, for example. We also need to have engagement from authorities, both in national and local level. That is why we try to build partnership also with the Ministry of Communications, Ministry of Villages, and so on. And in terms of sources, like to provide internet to comply with the policy and legal framework, we need to have official cooperations with ISP or telco operators, for example, and and for the funding support, the same situation here. The national corporate social responsibility or national funding source sometimes can be very challenging to get. But if you manage to work with international funding agencies, for example, it can attract investment both in national and local level, because there are there's a currency models that are working somehow, that the reputation is the good reputation is like a currency. If you can share a good story that inspires the other, then it will come with values and recognitions. And with these recognitions, local or national funding support can also somehow. That is why I think after working for several years in Ciptagelar village with the indigenous communities, with other communities, we publish a lot of stories and publications. And then the story, I think one thing that we learned, that the good story can travel to many different places. And it can inspire people, and it can also encourage people to add some more things to the story. And I think starting from last year, we started to attracted the local private company who are somehow willing to invest and try out the models of community networks. And hopefully, I think in the near future, there will be more support and more different initiatives in different areas. That is why currently we are also similar to what Sol do. We also try to work with the School of Community Network in order to replicate and find the other possible scenarios and models in order to expand this to the further level.
Thank you, Gustav. And then finally, Carla.
Yes, so when sharing specifically about the Mexican case and specifically about the cellular mobile telephony, well, the most important bond and relationship that is needed is among the people from the community, as I mentioned before. But then when you start to see the perspective into different levels, for example, this cellular mobile telephony is a cooperative which is deployed in 60 different communities. So the relationship among these communities is also very important. And also the decisions that are taken among these different communities, right? So because it is a cooperative, they have an assembly and they get together and then they decide how the information is being used and how are the things with privacy and security. So these relationships are very important, and we get support from other NGOs or other organizations that also share with us more about cybersecurity. Well, no, more about security or more about privacy or the use of data. So for example, by being a community network, we normally focus on access, but there are other important subjects that need to be discussed. The subjects or the matters on privacy, on digital rights, on sorry, my English is is failing now. But yes, we get support from other Mexican NGOs, and I think one of the most important stakeholders in our relationships is the regulator. We have a good relationship with the regulator, and this has been very important because we use different frequencies and we need access to licenses, and it has been crucial to discuss these things with them. We also got some funding from the, I forgot how to translate the name in English, but it's the Transportation and Communication Ministry in Mexico, which is different from the regulator. We have the ministry and then we have the regulator, and we got some financing from the regulator for the pilot. So that was also important back then. And also the support that we get from international organizations, the support that we get from APC, the support that we get from ISOC, the support that we get also from the ITU. We have a close relationship with the ITU, and we also participate in regulatory events inside CETEL, which is the Inter-American Commission for Telecommunications in the Americas region. So it's like a network of stakeholders that we have around us and that supports the work that we do, and it is very important. And also the support network that we have created with other organizations in Latin America, because what we have done in Mexico would not have been possible if it wasn't for the support of sister organizations in Colombia or in Argentina or in Brazil. So this network that has been created, this movement building of community networks in the region, has been super important for our growth in Mexico.
Okay, thank you, Carla. So a very big thank you to our three wonderful speakers, Saul, Gustav, and Carla, for your inspiring sharing and stories today. Okay, so before we bring the session to a close, it is my pleasure now to introduce Sabani Baller, who will give us her closing remarks. So Sabani, who spoke earlier briefly, she is currently the Asia Regional Coordinator for the Connecting the Unconnected project of the Association for Progressive Communications. Sabani is also a senior research scientist at the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay in India. So over to you, Sabani.
Thank you, Professor. And thanks everyone who have participated in this learning session today, the first session. Thanks to all the speakers, so Gustav and Carla. Carla, I'm extremely sorry, it's very late for you now, and you have been awake. I'm extremely sorry for that. But overall, I feel that it was very nice to have all these inspiring talks from the practitioners of community networks on the field, and setting the stage for, giving you a global perspective of the viability of community networks in different regions. So it's in Latin America, Africa, and in Asia. So these are just small snippets today that you got about the community networks movement that we are slowly building as part of the Association for Progressive Communications. We are, as you know, that this is going to be, we are going to have 2 more sessions The second session is going to be on the 27th of on the 24th of March, and we will be sending out the invite to all of y'all, and please register for that. And then we have the third session, which is going to be, the second one is going to be solely focused on Asia, where we'll be talking a lot about the community networks that has been seeded to grow in the Asian continent, and the challenges that we face and how do we overcome the various barriers. The third one, which is going to be on the 7th of April, is going to be on the policy and regulatory challenges. Yeah, so we come a full circle through these sessions, the 3 sessions that we have, and we will be very happy to have your participation in all the 3 sessions. And please feel free to ask anything about community networks, how to seed community networks to grow. Like, you know, today we had very nice questions about investment, for example, and about how does it, we might enter into some border issues when we enable connectivity. Yeah. Could you hear me? I don't know. Are you able to hear me all this time?
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. So please feel free to join all the sessions. On the next session is going to be on the 24th of March, and the third one is going to be on the 7th of April. So please join all the sessions, and we will be happy to. I will be happy to answer any questions that you have on how to seed community networks and the various other challenges that we face. So we do have an evaluation form, and that has been shared by Anton here in the chat. So please feel free to fill in the form so that we will cater to the needs of the participants. And thank you, everyone. It was very nice. It was a pleasure to be today here, participating and getting to know about getting to know the various people who have participated. I have also shared I have shared some readings on community networks. I have shared a paper, a very extensive research that has been done by Mike Jensen and Nicola Bidwell on the viability of community networks, and that has been across different continents. Then there is a GISWatch paper, that a Global Information Society paper, a Global Information Society edition in 2018 that focuses solely on community networks. Please feel free to go through them. And we also have a policy document that has been worked together with Internet Society. So please feel free. I have shared all the links with everyone. And yeah, thanks much. Thanks to all the speakers once again.
Thank you very much, Sabani. And before we end the session today, can I invite all of us to turn on our cameras again for our final photo opportunity. Okay, so let's turn on our videos or cameras.
Okay, taking the first photo. 3, 2, 1. Next photo. 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. And we hope to see you at the next learning session soon. So thank you, goodbye, and good day, good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Good night.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thanks, man.
you.